Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is Arnis here at the Freedom Forum, and I'd like to welcome my guests from Canada. Welcome, Wallace Klinck.
Good evening, Arnie. It's about 5 o'clock here, p.m., and well, we're having pretty nice weather out west here. It's going to be 5, 7 above, I think, for the next few days.
Okay,
So it's not so bad, although I don't think Bob has it quite as pleasant down east.
no worries. And Robert Klinck. Welcome, Robert.
Good to see you, Arnie. No, we're in a deep freeze here with a succession of record low nighttime temperatures anyway. I don't know, I think the daytime is probably not breaking records, but it's really cold at night with a bit of a wind chill too. So,
Was that about a minus 15 or something, Robert?
well, it was minus 16 the other night, and then minus 23 with a wind chill. So that's harsh.
That is certainly harsh. Well, in Adelaide, South Australia, it's Central Australia on the southern coast, high 20s today, tomorrow, and then Wednesday we're due for a 40. So you're getting a minus 20, we're getting a plus 40. It just goes to show you that we swing and we roll with the punches. The weather, we just adapt to it. So we're a pretty creative and diverse people, and I think that's fascinating. Okay, the subject for today, thwarts. Thwarts to the very long lever of technology. Thwarts to, and that is what is the carbuncle that goes with all this huge technological development that we've had over the last 250 years? What is it? In my view, it's centralization. It is that any industry itself, any person who wants to buy anything or wants to develop an industrial purpose or they want to build a home, the first thing they have to do is go to the banks for the issue of credit. And on the basis of that, individuals, industry, governments all have to go to the banks. And it is really this long lever of technology is entirely controlled by the banks. Your thoughts, Robert Klinck?
Well, this has been the situation for a long time now, and what is thwarting are having access to the fruit of the technology that's been developed by mankind, which is just spectacular now. But as soon as they developed a process that multiplied productivity 4 times over, that should have been paying a dividend to the community. But from generation to generation, we don't see a significant improvement in the living standards or the economic security of the population. So all this, it's an astonishing thing, but all the benefits, practically all the benefits of this technological progress are being filched away in some sneaky way.
Mm-hmm.
And the trick that has been played is that there are 2 aspects to the economy. There is a productive aspect to the economy, and there's a consumption aspect to the economy. And the production aspects have largely been solved. I mean, there's no problem. If you go to any factory and you ask the owner, could you increase your production? He would say, well, no problem at all, as long as there's demand for it. So the problem is at demand, and that's at the consumption end. And the trick has been played is that we're trying to solve the problem of the consumption end through the productive end. And they're 2 separate functions, and they ought to be treated separately. And the problems of them should be resolved according to their own particular characteristics. So this is the trick, and this is what has been used in order to maintain the control of the banks, as you say, Arnie, and thwart the immense production of our productive side of the economy from reaching the consumers.
Yeah. No, that's
in that is the promise of freedom for the population.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's an very interesting observation, Robert. That if we actually had the ability to make meaningful decisions in regard to consumption, and not in the form of debt, but rather in the form of credit, if we were actually issued sufficient credits to liquidate what the producer makes. That to me is a profound observation, and it's something that certainly hasn't been on the table. Wallace Klinck, your thoughts, please.
Yes, and when we speak, there's always the tendency to equate credit with debt. Credit actually means to believe. The credit of a society, the real credit of a society, is the ability to deliver goods and services as when and where required.
Hmm.
That is the real credit of society. And the producer's credit is his credible reputation in being able to fulfill an order or in that sense. So, but in any case, yes, economics is simply production, distribution, and consumption. And we have invented a money system which professes to serve that function. It does not properly serve that function.
Hmm.
It more readily serves the function of production if it's made available. But the problem is the way the system operates, it generates greater financial costs and prices than it actually liberates effective consumer purchasing power. Now, this is a rather subtle thing because, in fact, business brings in costs from previous cycles. And the orthodox people will say, well, there you are. Those functions, distributed incomes, they will be available to avoid any deficit of purchasing power. But the problem is the system is dynamic, and it recovers, it collects and recovers and cancels credits more so rapidly that those credits are not available when the final product comes out. And we're put in a position where we have to mortgage our future to borrow incomes from future production, which hasn't happened yet,
Hmm.
in order to acquire what we've produced in the past. So that the system is out of sync.
Hmm.
There is a time lag.
Hmm.
And it produces a situation of continuous illiquidity within the price system.
Yeah.
And that is why we are forced to live on tomorrow financially in order to attain or to obtain what we've already produced.
Mm.
And this means because it happens at this cycle, it's intrinsic to the system. It will happen at the next cycle, and it will become worse and worse and compounding as time goes on. So we become enslaved more and more to debt
Yeah.
as time
Yeah,
passes.
yeah. No, that observation, Wally, to me is substantiated using, if you like, the inductive or scientific method. The level of indebtedness of the world is logarithmic. It's going through the roof. $250 million of debt, and it's still going up. And yet, in the history of mankind, we have never ever been so productive. Now, the proposal, the Douglas proposal of a national dividend, is that we would find equilibrium in the financial system. We would find equilibrium, that we would be able to liquidate the cost incurred by industry in the products. And if a product is good and people want it, then obviously they would buy it. And if it's no good, then people would let it atrophy. They would let you wouldn't just have industry producing, producing, producing. So they would have to actually find the balance in the quality and if you like, the community's desire to own it. Democratizing money. It's something that hasn't never been thought of before. And yet Douglas saw it 100 years ago, that the automation, advanced control of industry, the actual cultural inheritance was there for everyone. And the only effective way of responding to that was by placing the money vote in as many hands as possible. Today we see a monopoly of the money vote in the hands of the banker who create money out of nothing. It is a monopoly, and there is no right for anyone else to have a money vote. And this is something that needs to be seriously considered in the light of this cultural inheritance, this advanced control, this very long lever of technology. Robert Klinck.
Yes. Well, The problem, again, as I mentioned, was that they try to solve this deficiency of purchasing power at the consumer end by insisting on more production. And this is just a means of putting people on a perpetual
treadmill.
A treadmill, indeed, that's the word. Sometimes I can't find my words anymore. And we run faster and faster and faster, and all we do is get further and further behind as far as debt is concerned. So it's a perverse approach to the problem. If you have a problem on the consumption end, you should be looking at the solution there. You shouldn't be going to the production end and saying, well, we'll try to solve it here. That's madness. We have a financial system that has been operating on the same principles, and they are principles that centralize power and strip power away from individuals and inhibit their freedom. We've had this thing now for centuries, and we are living in an environment of rapidly evolving economic change. We need a financial system that is adapted to the conditions of the 21st century. We already missed having a system that was adapted to the conditions of the 19th and 20th centuries because the banking system maintained its hold on things. But it's time for us to have a system that takes into account the superproduction and the automation and robotization of our economy, because we have a need for supplementation of incomes at the consumer level in order to make the whole thing work. Otherwise, it's dysfunctional.
Yeah, and the thing is that if prices are liquidated, if the industrial prices are liquidated, then the fact is that industry doesn't have to, if you like, compete for markets. It can just simply optimize its products. It can make them high quality and endurable, and then, if necessary, have a break, have some leisure, instead of just out there competing. And in the end, of course, what happens is one nation competes with the other, and it leads or escalates up to the point of war. We're fighting for an insufficiency. The insufficiency is in the financial system. It's the insufficiency of credit in the hands of the consumer. Wallace Klinck.
Yes, Arnie, that's right. Business has to compete, but it shouldn't have to compete in order to recover its costs from a source that is inadequate. The price system should be balanced. It should compete on the basis of quality, but not be driven into increasingly devious means of trying to recover its costs, like reducing quality, like carrying on sharp business practices and things like that. You see, the system pressures people into less than ethical behavior in order to try and survive. And if business has problems, I mean, every business will have certain challenges, but those problems are easily overcome with modern technology. And business would thrive if it was supported by adequate purchasing power. And so the difficulties that it would be technical difficulties, not financial difficulties, because of finance would reflect reality. And that's the way it should be. You know, I think it's kind of a subtle business because people don't have a proper understanding of what money is. I think people tend to look at money as a stock, something that's out there in various places. I don't know if they think that it drops from heaven, like manna from heaven, or that it grows on bushes, or whether it springs out of the ground, or what they think. They think of it as some kind of a commodity with permanence of existence. Money is not that in the modern world. Money is accountancy. Money is a flow. It's not a stock. It's a flow. And that flow is expressed in the costs and prices that industry generates and creates in respect of the goods it's producing. There's a reverse flow of money coming from the consumer. And that reverse flow tends to cancel out the flow of prices and costs and prices, and they should match.
But they don't.
So you see, it's a dynamic situation, and people don't understand the nature of the prices. They don't understand, for one thing, that money comes into existence through the action of the banks in issuing loans, creating money by issuing loans for the purposes of production.
Yeah.
Or more and more in the modern age, for the purposes of consumption, because production does not liberate enough income for consumption to be fully effective.
That's right.
So that we are caught both ways with debt. Industry hopes to recover its debt through its sales, and it should be able to do that, and there should be no problem. But when you get a situation of these costs being carried forward and accumulated and aggregating against the future and in terms of gathering debt, then you have a problem. And if it's something that's innate within the system or intrinsic to the system, then it is not self-liquidating and becoming worse all the time, then as Bob said, we're going to be put increasingly on an impossible treadmill of useless production in order to generate new incomes to go back and liquidate old costs, or we're going to be, we will be obligated in the future with regard to the mortgages we're placing on it. And so the whole thing is, there's a time lag which creates a deficiency, and it's a question of accountancy and flows of costs and prices and flows of income, and the income flow being inadequate.
You've touched on something I think is really, really important for us to substantiate, Wally. I'm just going to cut across to our website, so I'll lose your audio for a sec. On the left-hand column, this is the ALOR website library. And on the left-hand column here, I've actually placed an additional article in there. Normally, it's just the Bank of England with the quarterly reports and also the Royal Commissions in Australia. But this Deutsche Bank, the Bundesbank, is actually saying exactly the same thing as the Bank of England. And that is that the banks themselves, every time they create a new loan, it's an expansion of the money supply. Every time industry goes cap in hand to the banks and they say we want to run for another year, this is our projects, this is our plans, this is our expenses, this is our maintenance, and all these sorts of things, and based on this budget estimates they get issued a loan, and so they can continue to function for another year. But it's actually the banks that entirely control them. Finance entirely controls industry, and it's no different if you like the individual who wants to buy a home. Banks entirely control that home, the purchase of that home. If it's a new home, a construction and purchase of that home. And so banks entirely control that policy. Now, when we talk about the thwarts of the very long lever of technology, my concern, if you like, part of this question that we don't actually look at, even in this forum, is the unethical behaviour that's actually being presented as acceptable. Now, in centralisation of power, the amassing of all of this power that the central banks of the world are placing in the hands of individuals who control those banks, that to me is such a huge temptation for corruption. Now, politicians will often say, if we only had a change of heart, if only the community would have a change of heart. They put it on the community to actually fix the system, when in actual fact the system is corrupt. The system is corrupt and it is corrupting. Centralisation of power is corrupting. It's against the very nature of the human being to have that much power. It goes back to, if you like, some of the booklets by Jeffrey Dobbs, the Tennessee Valley Authority, he wrote about On Planning the Earth, and how corrupting that was. Putting so much power in the hands of such a small group of individuals, to the point where they found expression in making the atomic bomb. They wanted to exert so much power over their fellow mankind. The display every year of China, of Russia, on their national day, what do they show? It's always weapons. It's always weapons to show that they have power over their own population and power or threat of imminent destruction over their own population and over all of the colonies that they dominate. It's power, and this corrupting influence is something that has to be, if you like, worked through. If we don't find an ethical and moral answer to the centralization of power, then we will go back to a new dark ages. Robert Klinck.
Yes, well, there's always an attempt to shift responsibility for the failure of the system onto the population in general. And we see this now, with all these theses about sexism and racism and all that sort of thing. And we are inherently evil, and therefore we are responsible for the problems that exist in society. But the people who have control over society are the ones who create the money. Because in order for anything to be done in a money society, which we live in, you need money. And the bankers are the ones who control that. And with this premature cancellation of credit, they maintain a constant shortage of money, which makes people, businesses, governments dependent upon them. You never get ahead in this game. You're always falling behind. So they maintain their control by creating an artificial shortage of money in relation to the needs of the various functions of the economy, particularly the consuming function of the economy. And it's really astonishing that, I don't know, businesses don't realize this, because they're going bankrupt all the time, and they're having to advertise like mad in order to have customers for their products. It's so forced. And you would think they would want a sort of a relaxation of the financial stress on the population, so that they could function as consumers for their products more readily. So it mystifies me. The problem is that we are infected with this notion of Puritanism, and we can't shake it. And you've got to recognize that we're living in an age when the necessity for work is declining, and therefore people ought to be enjoying the benefits of that. It's regarded as a curse, it seems. Whenever a project is proposed, all they talk about are the number of jobs it's going to generate. They don't ever talk about the other benefits it's going to produce. It's just this enterprise is now going to generate 400 new jobs. It's crazy. We don't want new jobs. We want the fruits of the enterprise.
That's right.
To heck with the jobs.
Yeah,
the jobs are irrelevant. The jobs are only relevant because we're living in a time when we have a restricted consumer buying power.
Yeah.
And that's all artificial. It's a control policy.
Yeah. No, that's a profound observation, Robert, that you talk about Puritanism, and to me the outworking, if you like, of the philosophy of Puritanism is essentially communism. You could call it capitalism, if you like, monopoly capitalism. To me, they're exactly the same thing, that people can only ever be ethical if they're working 40, 60, 80 hours a week. Otherwise, they're an unethical person, and they're not deserving of the fruits of the productive system. It really is an iniquity that's going on when it should be a time of abundance. Wally Klinck.
Yes, Arnie, it's really tragic. It's a degradation of the nature of human life to say that work validates you. If work validates you, then just how much work really validates you. There's no end to it. It's completely out of balance. It's an abnormal attitude to life. It really is. Puritanism is the desire to control other people when you should be concerning yourself with how you can perform better yourself before you, in other words, take the beam out of your own eye, because before you attempt to take it out of your neighbors. Don't criticize other people until you tend to your own responsibilities.
Yeah.
and it'd be a lot better world if we had it. Bob said it's madness. Well, it's madness, but believe me, it's madness with a method.
Yeah.
And that method is the exercise of power. Now, the exercise of power can be attributed to different things, two things primarily. It's the desire to control other people, which you have to analyze. And it is also partly due to being misled by idealism or utopianism, which is unrealistic, and which tends to put forward the idea that if you could just centralize administration and power in one place where it could be effectively administered, then everything would be fine. But of course, that neglects the very fundamental problem of who is going to be in control. Is it going to be God, or is it going to be some fallible man or a group of men or women who really don't know what they're doing and cannot possibly pontificate and determine what the purpose of every other human being's life is?
Yeah.
If we have freedom, then we as individuals must have freedom to govern the course of our own lives as much as possible.
Yeah. That's a beautiful,
and voluntarily, not through direction.
That's right. That's a beautiful picture that you're painting, Wally, because I look on, if you like, the living in my home and having a small amount of land, and I just recently captured a beehive, a bee swarm yesterday. And the thing is that I think about the actual placement of the beehive, what would suit the bees best, working in regard to people around the bees so that they're safe, the flight path, the sun, the direction of sun, where the prevailing winds are when it's howling and blowing a gale, all these sorts of things you take into account. I can do those things, I can choose those things, I can actually take them into account because I'm here, I'm looking at what I've got and what works best. Now, if someone remotely is attempting to control every facet of my life, they would not have a clue. They wouldn't have a clue. This is where they're going to go, well, I'm telling you, as an apiarist, I've got to go hunting as to which trees are flowering now. They don't flower at the same time each year. They don't even flower each year. And sometimes they will flower and sometimes they won't. And it's dynamic. And all these things are taken into account. No different with the farmer. The farmer knows his paddock, he knows his soil, he knows the grasses, he knows what rain has fallen. It could be different from one paddock to the other as to where the rain clouds are. All of these things, whether the paddock needs to be fallow or whatever. We need farmers, and they need to be on their land, and they need to know their land. And to turn around and have some huge conglomeration to produce our food and ensure our food security. This to me is the big ticket. It ensures our food security, and that's why I would like to see as many farmers on their land as possible so that they're producing food for us Australians. And after reading a recent article about what's going on in Venezuela, central planning is not working. Their power grid is down, their water system is down, their communications is down, all because it's centrally controlled. And I believe it is deliberate. That is its purpose. It's actually running through to unwind or induce famine over that nation. We're getting up to 29 minutes. Closing comments, please, Robert Klinck.
Yes, well, I was just thinking that really one of the greatest benefits that Christianity has conferred on humanity is freeing it from this puritanical concept, which is the imposition of a system, a frozen system on society. Everybody has to conform to this. But Jesus said, all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of the Lord. Well, that makes it sound maybe a little hopeless, but he also said, be ye therefore perfect, even as your Father in heaven. So the thing about human life, the life of the individual, is that he evolves, and he has a chance to evolve, and he changes through life. And this is what is the meaning of life. It's the course of your evolving and learning and improving as you go through life. And if you have this a system being imposed, Puritanism, and the work for work's sake, it's a total antithesis to the whole Christian concept of the importance of the individual and of his discovering for himself what is important to him and what he should be doing in the course of his life.
Mm.
It's a this Puritanism is what is thwarting the benefits of technology reaching us, because if people were free, they would be exploring, developing, and doing all sorts of creative things, and not stuck in ruts imposed by a central system, governments and banks telling them what to do.
Yeah, yeah. I see governments as essentially the front counter for central banks and central industry, and nothing more. And the fact is that they've long since gone past being representative. In fact, the political party system was designed to undo representative government. Your closing
And
thoughts?
that, Arnie, is why you will find no politician who will criticize the financial system
Yeah, yeah.
in
They're
a
all
fundamental way. They just don't do it.
no.
As you say, they're a front operation for the banks.
Yeah. Your closing comments, please, Wallace Klinck.
Oh, yes, Arnie. Well, I don't know. You must feel a bit out of place because our Marxist friends would call you as a rather antisocial person. You want to be free. What you need is a whole battery of government departments and bureaucrats trying to determine what you should do with your resources. So that you never will get a chance to really do anything with them, because there's just nothing but perpetual confusion and chaos. But it's right. You're quite correct. Individuals have to have a right to express their initiative, and it is only individuals expressing their initiative who have really contributed to the advancement of civilization, not individuals who are ciphers or put into a corner in some state apparatus. They're not the creative people in society. They're the drones. And of course, the problem is when we have to be dependent upon our incomes for our survival, we resort to all sorts of devious ruses in order to give ourselves a paying activity.
Yeah.
So the universities are full of people who are inventing all sorts of wild and wonderful ideas just to keep themselves busy so that they can get their paychecks, so that they can continue to lead the relatively comfortable, soft life that they have. They don't want to lose it.
Yeah.
And the only way that they see is to maintain it, is to maintain their purchasing power through their employment. There is no question of inheritance. They don't know, they don't conceive such a thing as inheritance.
Yeah.
That's not the way they think. And it's the same thing with labor unions. Labor unions are worried about working themselves out of a job, because when they're out of a job, they have no more source of income. Well, that money that is accumulated, that debt that's accumulating, is such an enormous obligation against the future, is actually stolen purchasing power, which should have been paid out regularly into the economy as the economy progressed, so that people could obtain what is being produced as it's being produced, not by mortgage in the future, but by current income effective in their hands, money that will go back through the system and will be canceled, just as the present debt money is canceled. When you get a loan, the money doesn't stay in existence. It goes back to the producer and back to the bank and is canceled.
Yeah.
And now you're left with a debt that you have to work off for the rest of your life, for the rest of our lives, on the treadmill.
That's right. It's
I know institutionalized slavery.
It is. That's right. I know that Douglas referred to it as, in an analogy, as a train system, and issuing tickets so that the train could actually could function, could process, and that's all it is an issuing of tickets. But I put it to you that you can actually even consider it as issuing votes. You're actually voting in the financial system for the things that you choose. You choose. So it's actually democratizing money. And
And
Douglas,
also, Arnie,
yeah,
if that's being taken away because we are in a position, the banks actually consider the credit that they issue as a commodity. It's something that they possess and they can sell.
mm,
It's not just an institution that makes it possible for production and consumption to occur. They sell this credit to the community and they regard their credits as a commodity. And in order to increase the value of that commodity, they try and restrict its availability relative to its need.
that's right.
And that is where we're getting this tremendous thwarting of the benefits of the long lever of technology.
That's right. That's it. Excellent. Good summary, Wally. Thank you, Robert. I'm pleased your comms line worked today. It's been a good forum, and I've really enjoyed it. Thank you both so much.
Thank you, Arnie.
And thank you, Arnie, very much.